Anytime you have some success, I think people are always chasing you, people are always studying you. So it's imperative that we continue to add, continue to tweak, continue to find a better way to do certain things.
Hello, everybody. That was Jesse Minter, Michigan co-defensive coordinator on the In the Trenches pod. Yeah, teams are chasing. They're studying Michigan. They are coming after the Wolverines after what transpired last year. Michigan winning the Big Ten again, going to the college football playoffs again. So Minter and Michigan knows that. Welcome in. We'll be talking about Minter and Michigan today. In fact, we're going to be leading off with that. We'll also look to the spring scrimmage that took place in East Lansing this past Saturday. I watched that this morning. It was a barrel of laughs. I'll give you my takeaways from the Spartan spring scrimmage. But we will start talking about Jesse Minter and Michigan's Minter's Monsters. I got a question for you, a quick question. And, this is a show where we pose questions to you. And if you're watching this live, you are able to get in on the feedback and participate in real time. If you're watching this after the fact, if you're listening to this after the fact, welcome in. We're glad to have you in here. Not everybody's available at 1 o'clock, but if you are ever available at 1 o'clock, we are live 5 days a week, weekdays at 1 o'clock, talking about the latest in Michigan sports. We've been doing that all the way back since November 21, and the plan is to continue that into the future. So we are here for you. The question: do you think Michigan's defense will be as good as last year's defense? Michigan, in the final analysis, they ranked top 7 in scoring offense, and they also ranked top 7 in scoring on defense. You want to look at the numbers: 566 scored, 225 yielded. I'll give you my answer to that particular question. But, if you take out and just leave in the Power 5, which I did today, you see that Michigan ended up ranking number 5 in Power 5 points per game defensively at 16.1. It looks a little better when you take the group of 5. That's what they're called, the G5s. And you throw them out and you just go to the Power 5s. Michigan was top 5. So, pretty good. Any way you want to slice it up for Minter in his first year as co-defensive coordinator, you could say, unless you want to go to that college football semifinal against TCU, where the Horned Frogs rung Michigan up for, what was that, 51 points. But you start playing the game, and I mean, it's a game, but it's a true game, but you start, taking this out, that out, and everything else. Michigan's offense, as everybody knows, they threw to TCU for 2 pick sixes. So that'd be 14 less points. So then actually give up the 51, the defense overall. But, you can do that game. I was playing that game earlier. I was taking the TCU game and just throwing it out and saying, well, Michigan threw 13 games. Well, Michigan through the regular season, you do that. We do that. And it is something that happens. I just didn't want to do too much of it. Look, Michigan had a really good season. You could call it a great season, very close to a great season. Every season you beat Ohio State's great. You beat Ohio State and you go undefeated and you go to the Big Ten title and you win a Big Ten championship. I mean, how could you not call that a great season? It seems pretty great. And then they did it again. They matched what they did the year before, this time on the road with Ohio State, different opponent in the Big Ten championship game, going to the college football playoff. I am guilty of sounding like a broken record just talking about Michigan and, what they've been doing and the success that they've had on the field the last 2 years. I'm guilty of that, close to a great season. When you have an undefeated season, when you go 12-0, when you go 13-0 and you win the Big Ten title, you're going to have a lot of good numbers. If Michigan wins it next year, they're going to have great stats. Last year, one of the issues, I don't know if it was an issue I had, it is kind of an issue, is that, Michigan played Colorado State, and then they played Hawaii, and they scored, damn near 60 points. And then they put up a 50 spot, almost 60 on UConn and shut them out. And so after that, the numbers from Michigan that they were throwing out there, some of the tweets like, Michigan's the greatest ever defensively. They're the best in the country in every single number. And it was, I'm looking at that and I'm like, oh, the best defense ever for Michigan is okay. I mean, like, let's, at some point you want to put the numbers out there. And did I do it after the Maryland game? No. Did I do it after the Iowa game? No. Indiana? No. I said I was going to wait to Penn State because Penn State had some gaudy numbers themselves. Remember, they were one of the best rush defenses in the country until, Michigan tuned them up for 418 yards. Then I started using some of the superlatives, and guess what? They deserved it. And, it proved out that that all of the lofty numbers that were put out there, they were able to validate them by the kind of season that they had. But you just think about it. Is this team going to be good defensively? Are they going to be as good as last year? Let's see where the people are at when I ask this question. Mark, who usually asks the question, he's answering the questions because he's first up. Let's see. Well, Jenkins lined up at edge with Graham, Grant, Benny inside in multiple sets. If I had to guess, Mark, I would say sometimes. I think Jenkins is good enough and we saw it on the first snap of the spring game. Do I think that was a ruse for other teams? No, I think that Michigan and Steve Clinkscale and Jesse Minter and company on the defensive side, as you heard him say, teams are looking at Michigan now. They, what they have done the last 2 years. Maybe they will recruit like Michigan. Maybe they'll try to coach it like Michigan, but they've got him under the microscope. And with Jenkins, his athleticism, he can play both. It's a smart move to, move him around because you do have, and we're going to look into, some of that personnel. Trevor McHugh, who joins us, at times here on the Good Afternoon Michigan football program. He's the senior editor of the Mason Blue Review. He's always writing stories about, Michigan's depth chart and the defense and the ranking, all of these things. He's always looking at, but he looks at the nose tackle and the defensive tackle and the edge and moving it around. And it can get a little confusing. I know, the different techniques and what's the difference between defensive tackle, what's the difference between nose tackle. Some of these guys, there are not so much interchangeable, but guys that can play multiple positions. And, they can add to some of the techniques and they can play different positions on there. And I do think that Jenkins could be one. Mark, following it up with a question. On D, not as good the scoring. Penn State and OSU will score more this year. Let's see. Iowa, Illinois crossovers last year, very weak. Purdue, Nebraska, Minnesota will score more than the West. In the West, I think he means. Fifth D really needs some breaks to repeat. I think this is a good point. Illinois and Iowa were really good defensive teams last year, but they weren't great offensively. And Michigan's two crossovers this year, it is Nebraska and it is Minnesota. And they're playing at both of those places. So, that's an excellent point, Mark. I like it. I think it's one that people should remember. That doesn't mean it's, this thing's going to hell in a handbasket, but it's a very good point, I think. Blank name doesn't think so. He doesn't think Jenkins is over 300 pounds now. So he says I think he is strictly a defensive tackle. Yeah. Well, okay. All right. Mark making some more points about the defense. Let's see what he says. Good inside for Blue almost every down. Uh, Likely giving Good the reps to demonstrate improvement, but Jenkins will almost always be outside those two. Plus, keeping those turnovers hard to replicate. Mentioning Good, Cam Good, who came in last year and sprinkled in there a little bit, but a year in the system, big guy, and you saw him. You saw Big 99 during the spring game, and it's one of those things where we didn't care about the score, didn't really care about overall who was moving the ball, or you just look at some of the guys and how they look. Cam Good was somebody. Hey, look at 99 out there. He looks pretty good moving around, making some tackles, pushing some guys backwards. Noteworthy. 99. You can see him in the rotation. Good question, or a good point about Mr. Good. Yeah, I don't think it's the part I was going to say, and I wasn't thinking about the crossovers in the Big Ten, is that being undefeated is difficult, and doing having 2 years in a row being winning the Big Ten, that's going to be difficult. As much as Michigan's been gunning at Ohio State, and everybody's been gunning for Ohio State, everybody's gunning for Michigan. I don't think that it will be as good, but that doesn't mean they still can't be undefeated, and that doesn't mean that they don't have their best shot at winning the championship. I actually think they do have their best shot at winning the championship. A lot of that has to do with having the head coach in place, having the quarterback in place and coming back for a second year, and then just overall with the personnel. And one thing about college football, Michigan is a little different than other teams. They're very good in time of possession because they run the football so much. And that's different than most of the teams that you see out there. Michigan's running it a lot more than all of the, certainly the top 5, top 10, whatever, in the top 25. I also think about just football over the last 5 or 10 years. A defense, thinking about them, keeping opponents under 10 points or shutting them out. That seems like a bygone era. I think of Georgia the last 2 years. Georgia won the national championship the last 2 years. Georgia gave up 41 points to Ohio State in the college football semi, and Georgia gave up 41 points against Alabama in the SEC championship in 21. Now, Ohio State and Alabama are two very good football teams. They're two quarterbacks, despite what people trying to knock C.J. Stroud this week. And hey, it's fun. He's a Buckeye quarterback. Undress him. But those two will go 1-2 in the draft. It's not that you heard that here first. I would put my money on those two going number 1 and number 2. But the point is they both put up over 40 points on the national champs. So the second point to that is that, you're going to give up against good teams. You can give up a lot of points. It's about being able to come up and get a big turnover at a key spot, make a key play. As I was going to say, is this bad? All right, I'll say it. As bad as the TCU game was last year in the Fiesta Bowl, as bad as the Philly special and the 2 pick sixes and the fumble at the goal line were, and those were bad. Those are bad plays. One of those plays can end up where you lose and you look back and say, oh, this thing was doomed to the Philly special. The 2. If Michigan makes one play on defense against Johnston for that 76-yard touchdown, I think they win that game. Even if you go to the final, I'd have to look at the play-by-play sheet and everything else, but Michigan got down there and scored. And there were a lot of people they need to score quicker. I thought they were doing all right, but what they needed to do is when TCU got the ball back late, is they had to get a 3-and-out, and they didn't. TCU was able to run, I think, on first down for like 8 yards, 7, 8 yards. That wasn't the ball game ultimately, but that was a big blow for the defense. If they could have been able to get off the field there and been able to give the offense a little bit more time ultimately than they had, I think Michigan would have been able to come down, score, and win that game. But TCU was able to run it for 70 yards, and then they were able to get a first down after that, and that cost Michigan, I don't know, maybe you've timed it out, maybe others have, 20, 30, 40 seconds, whatever it was. At least 30, I'll say, just thinking back about it. So, your defense being able to make a big play in a big game, even if they're giving up 40, 50 points. Can this team do that? Last year, as I was sitting here saying the same kind of things, I was like, who's going to make the big plays for Michigan? Because in 21, if you remember, Michigan went to Nebraska, and it looked like they were going to lose that game. The Cornhuskers went wild in the third quarter. Remember, Michigan was shutting out Nebraska at the half in Lincoln, and then they scored 22 points in the third quarter, and it looked like it was going to be lights out for Michigan. Corum started running the ball, and it came down to the end. What happened? We all remember now. Brad Hawkins, a super senior, was able to get the fumble, and Michigan won the game. The defense didn't play great that game. They played great in the first half, and they made a big play at the end. Brad Hawkins coming away and making the big play. It's like the Penn State game in 21 as well. Now, Michigan has to go to Happy Valley this year. That wasn't Michigan's greatest game. Michigan had only had 14 points till late in that game. But in the last 6 minutes, remember they fumbled the ball, and Penn State got it back. But Michigan got obviously they got the 47-yard touchdown, Eric All. That was huge. It gave them the lead. But they also needed the defense to stand up and make some big plays there at the end. 4 down on Dotson as well. They did it on the 4th down, and U of M able to make the big plays in a big spot in that game to be able to win it. So, first, I'm telling you how it can be done, if it can be done. I like the personnel on this defense, and while they might not be top 5, I think they can be top 10. And I think that's going to be good enough to be able to do all the things that you want. And what you want is Michigan to go 15-0. Now, that Penn State game, Michigan could lose, and they could still have everything. They could drop a game, and they might still be able to do everything that they want. Go back to 21 again. They lost to Michigan State. Felt like the world had ended. But it didn't, because things went well after that. I would just rather have Michigan not lose any games. I would just rather have them win them all, and so we don't have to worry about any of that. But it is something to at least keep in mind. All right, so Minter and Monsters last year ended up top 5 if you pull out the group of 5 and just go to the Power 5, giving up just over 16. Let's look at some of the other numbers. This is one of the things that I don't know if Michigan's going to be able to replicate. It would be nice. The second half adjustments, the flat out second half shutdown of the other team. And I did pull a series of games out without looking at the entire thing, but 7 games the last 7 games of the regular season last year that started at Indiana and ended in Columbus. Just look at what Michigan was able to do in the second half. They pitched a shutout against Indiana. Penn State had an opening drive field goal in the second half against Michigan, and then they got shut out. Michigan State shut out. Rutgers, who had the lead on Michigan at the half in Piscataway, shut out. Nebraska, shut out. Illinois had 10 points in the second half. Here's the nice one. Here's the one to remember. Here's the one to tell Ohio State fans about their high-powered offense and and Ohio State was leading at the half, just like Rutgers. But Ohio State only had three little measly points in the second half at home against Michigan. The juggernaut offense that put 41 on the board against Georgia. It's the part where you sit back and you say, if Michigan could have beaten TCU, maybe they could have done to Georgia what TCU did to Michigan, that being a pretty sizable underdog, 6-7 points, but played their best game on that day and won a national championship. So this is one of the main points for Michigan. And you say, well, how can they have that? How can the defense perform that well again? How can you expect that? Well, I don't know if you should expect it, but they've got good personnel. They've got high talent. They've got blue chippers on the defensive side of the ball. And they still have that coaching staff. So however the coaching staff processes what's going on during the game and how they are making the adjustments at the half or into the third quarter, into the fourth quarter, the proof is in the score there. And so I think they can do those things again. And the thing about the blue chip talent, I was thinking about this with, the recruiting rankings. Michigan wasn't great in the recruiting rankings last year. And, they had what we talked about this week with ESPN, who they came out with their FPI, and Michigan got penalized and dropped down to 6th in the FPI for chances to win the national championship because of their recruiting. And yet last year, even though they finished 18th, whatever it was, 17th or 18th, I don't know if there was as good of linemen, true freshman linemen, than Mason Graham in all the country. So whatever Graham was as a 4-star, I don't know if there are services that bump people up or whatever, but Graham, if we were looking back and I was adjusting the recruiting ranking, if I was into that, whatever the number was with Graham, I would bump him up to a 5-star. Now, I would do the same thing with Kenneth Grant, who got on the field and was impressive in the way that it looks like. And if he's cusping on being that kind of 5-star recruit. Of course, Will Johnson was a 5-star and he played, up to that billing. So, the adjustment for that talent, Michigan's got it. And they've got some of that young talent on the defensive side. I'd also put Derek Moore. And I don't know how many of the 5-star defensive ends were out there, or the defensive ends that were rated more highly than Derek Moore, but I don't know if I would take any of them over Derek Moore after what I saw from him in just a few reps last year. But then what I saw from the reps in the spring game, this guy's a monster. How many guys are you taking? If you could go back and say, oh, Michigan needs to recruit some of these 5-stars, I'll take Derek Moore. He looks as good as any of them. All right. That's how I'm feeling about the defense. Let's take some more of the feedback before we look a little closer at the U of M defense. Otis, the new monsters of the Midway reside at Michigan. Let's see. There's the I like your keyboard prowess there, Otis. He's got this. I thought it looked like the Victors, but now I see the Michigan. Here's the M off to the, and then there's the. I'm not very good at. I have to practice that. I still don't know. I could do a hook them down. I don't know if I could do the Michigan. I need to work on that. But this is good. This is good. From Otis. Nice job, Otis. I'm making myself laugh. I just want to say here quickly, and it gives me a chance to just tell everybody, just like it's down on the crawl here about joining the Maize and Blue Review. Before we get to Andres, do it by going to michigan.rivals.com. And hey, Michigan fans, why not join up with the Maize and Blue Review? You love the Wolverines. You want to know everything that's going on at all times, the latest with Michigan football, basketball, recruiting. So do it. Accept the challenge. Go to michigan.rivals.com today, and we will see you on the Den. That is the all-day, all-night posting board that I'm on. all day and all night communicating with Michigan fans and having a lot of fun. What I wanted to say is that it doesn't matter how I'm feeling throughout the day, the night, and everything else. I get to 1 o'clock, and this is the highlight of my day. Being able to communicate. My wife's not watching this one. This is the one of the highlights of the day. Being able to interact with all of you and talk about Michigan. My wife understands that. Come on. She was at a restaurant with her colleagues yesterday, and apparently some, a young, strapping, Casanova or so, whatever, came walking in, and all the ladies there, and even the guys were like, whoa, there's a swashbuckling young man. And my wife was like, they were like, well, what kind of, what kind of guy do you like? And she's like, I like, the bald Michigan fan podcasters. They were all like, what? All right. It's true story. Andre says, I think this will be the best Michigan defense under Harbaugh. Ooh, Andres, going against it, what everybody's saying today. The depth is going to be impossible for opposing offenses to deal with for 4 quarters. Let's read it one more time. Andre says, this will be the best Michigan defense under Harbaugh. The depth is going to be impossible for opposing offenses to deal with for 4 quarters. Otis agrees with Andres. Account 22 going back to the FPI saying ESPN is pumping up the Buckeyes like clockwork. Mark talking about Penn State and Ohio State. Going to be really hard to keep them under 40 points. I don't know. Michigan, how many did Ohio State? 40. Talk about keeping Ohio State under 20. What did they score 2 years ago? 27. So they kept them under 30. This past year, how many points did they score? Did they score 20? They did, 23. So they're averaging, around 24 points against Michigan? This game is in Ann Arbor, and they've got a new quarterback. I think you keep Ohio State under 20 points. Penn State scored 17 points 2 years ago because it was 21-17. And then, sure enough, they scored, what did they have, 14 in the first? They ended up 17. The last 2 years, Michigan has held Penn State to under 20 points. They scored 17 the last 2 years because it was 41-17. Because Michigan was up, 16-14. They were dominating the first half, but Penn State was only down 2 points. But then Penn State only got a field goal, 17 points. And the year before, 21-17. Keeping Penn State under 20 and keeping Ohio State. All right, I'll adjust what I had to say. Keeping Ohio State under 24 points and keeping Penn State under 21. Under 20. Hell, if they want to improve, let's say 14. Keep Penn State's rushing attack to under 100 yards. Can this team do it? Let's get some more in here. OT. The offense lost the game versus TCU. Should the defense have played better? There's no doubt about it, but you can't give up 14 points to the other team. I know what you're saying, OT. I hear what you're saying. Oh, that's going to be some of the Michigan State stuff. Are we ready to get to that yet? Not yet. Let's get a couple more in here. I think we've gone through the FPI. I think the flaw is that, tweaking those recruiting rankings a little bit, with the quarterbacks and everything else. I get what you're talking about. The fraudulent power index. And I like, if you don't like how somebody's voting, you say, they're a jackass and that they're slanted and they're, Spartan homer, an SEC honk, we all get that. And then if they try to use a formula, then we're talking about the formula being flawed. And so I don't know, like preseason rankings, who cares? It's all for a bunch of fun. This should mean more than a bunch of people voting, but there's That's the funny part. When you use the eye test and you use just like Michigan compared to Ohio State, you would never. There's no real way to put Ohio State in a preseason ranking in front of Michigan, knowing where the game's going to be played, knowing that Michigan has their quarterback coming back, and just knowing Michigan's style and what difficulty Ohio State has had against it, and Ohio State not having one of their quarterbacks back, you would never put Ohio State. Why would you? It's going to be really hard for Michigan to beat them 3 times in a row. BS. Okay. Let's look at specifically some of the guys that Michigan is going to have to replace. And for those, let me see here how I wanted to do this. Here it is. Michigan has to replace Mozzie, Mike Morris, and DJ Turner and Jaimon Green, who did start, but as we know, Will Johnson by the end of the season was in there. So no offense to Jaimon Green, who ended up getting attacked and knocked out by MSU, by the green and white. You already saw that Johnson was good to go. So they have to really replace these 3 guys: Mozzie, Mike, and DJ Turner. And how are they going to be able to do that? Well, let's look at it. When it comes to Mozzie, you look at Michigan and the players that we have listed as starters: Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, and Chris Jenkins. Those are 3 pretty good football players. Now, I think that you should feel good about Michigan. As good as Mozzie Smith was, Grant looked not just good, Grant looked great in the spring game. And this is another thing where you say, and, the question was, well, what kind of conditioning when you get a guy that, is whatever he is, 6'5", 360, what kind of conditioning? Well, he played the whole game and he looked as good as you could possibly. You couldn't ask for him to look any better. So I think you have to be encouraged about Grant. Good was the same way. He flashed where you could say, hey, in a rotation, you kind of like him coming in and getting some snaps. Graham was the surprise of fall camp last year that he was named as a starter. I think Rayshon Benny is a future superstar. Rayshon Benny reminds me of Chris Jones of the Kansas City Chiefs. They look alike. He runs like a deer, and he is strong, as from what I can see, as anybody out there. And Jenkins is a monster. So I feel pretty good about the Michigan defensive line. I know that's a lot of superlatives to say, wow, man, you're really high on the Michigan defensive line. It's true. I am. I'm really high on Benny, but I'm high on Grant, and, everybody's high on Graham, and everybody's high on Jenkins. You get to the defensive end spot, Derek Moore. Derek Moore was really good last year as a true freshman. You make that jump from freshman to sophomore season. Derek Moore looked like an all-pro defensive end in the spring game. So Moore and McGregor, they're the ones that are going to replace Morris. Do I think that they can, the team of McGregor and Moore can replace the production of Mike Morris? I loved Mike Morris, but I think that they can. I think the team here, and more on these edges in just a second. You also have Josiah Stewart in there. And the one guy that, this is, again, one of those things and how you rank them and put them in there weak side. I also put Jalen Harrell in the mix there. And he is listed as, let's see how they end up putting him. They got him as the, at the linebacker in there, but he seems like he could be an edge right with Stewart. McGregor, Moore, Stewart, and then also Jalen Harrell. That's a pretty good 4. Mike Minter was talking about it, and we talked about it a lot as well. And I'm going to give it up to Jim Scarcelli because he didn't jump out when I at first watched the spring game myself, but when I started watching that tape with Scar, Keyshawn Bennett. Keyshawn Bennett is a factor. Whatever he did in the other 14 practices in spring, I wasn't sure, but he was a standout in the spring game, number 52. And then Minter this week mentioned Bennett and TJ Guy in there as the guys that you're talking about on the edge that you come after. This might be a little bit of an underplayed factor with the Michigan defense, and it might go to what we had Andres that was saying about this defense. People, because in the Maryland game, the biggest highlight, Junior Colson lost his, spot and was chasing it, and it wasn't a good rep for Junior Colson. Minter said that he has as high a ceiling as anybody on the team. Remember, he played as a true freshman, just a sophomore last year. Junior Colson can be an outstanding football player at Michigan. You have Roller. Pollard stood out as we watched him yesterday in the spring game. Roller played as a true freshman. How about, Michigan's linebacking core is definitely improved from last year. No attrition. Colson's a year older. Roller and Pollard as their backups. Both of those guys, if you wanted to tell me that you think one of those guys is going to be a future star, I wouldn't argue with you. Barrett is versatile. They brought in Ernest Hausman from the transfer portal from Nebraska. He looked good in the spring game. Anybody that talks about Hausman looks at him and says, this guy is an outstanding, linebacker. He's a Big Ten linebacker all day long. He's right there in the middle of the Michigan defense. The Wolverines add NHG, Nakai Hill-Green. He didn't play at all for Michigan last year. He was one of the high risers heading into last year. He's back. Harrell, I think, is the most underrated player on the defense. So what are we talking about with the linebackers? What you were talking about is that you have a big up arrow with Michigan's linebackers. However you want to put the edges and the defensive tackles and the nose and everything else, they lose Mozzie Smith and Mike Morris. We went through. They've got some capable. I think that they can replace those guys' production as we just walked through. But the linebackers with Hausman and Nakai Hill-Green, they've added. Oh yeah, Samaj Bridgman and come on. This is a unit that if you said last year what was the weak link, if they're on a top 5 defense in the country, you'd say, well, it's probably linebacker. Well, everybody's back, and then they add 2 guys there at linebacker. Nobody's talking about that. Up arrow for Michigan's defense. And the secondary overall, as much as we talk about the corner and you hear people like, they should go to the transfer portal. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll go out there and get some starting corner. Sounds great. Go out there and get a starting corner, just roll into the transfer portal and do that. But when you look at the secondary, we know that Will Johnson's there. And so McBurrows and Walker, if it's just those two, well, Keyshawn Harris and Miles Pollard. Pollard is my guy. I try not to be biased or anything about him. I liked him the first time that I set eyes on him in the maize and blue at the spring game in 21. He looked good in this year's spring game. And, oh, yeah, Jesse Minter mentioned Pollard when he was talking with John Jansen on his podcast. So after Will Johnson, do I think they could find a capable cornerback 2 between McBurrows, Walker, Pollard, Harris, the 2 or 3 freshmen? I do. Agent Zero, the captain. No one made a bigger play last year than Sainristil still against Ohio State in the second half. Zeke Berry. This is where Trevor McHugh has him as a nickel potential matchup piece. I like that. Zeke Berry stood out in the spring game. I feel pretty good about him. And Rod Moore, when Jim Harbaugh talks about Rod Moore, when you hear a coach say, I wouldn't mind to have 11 Rod Moores out there, high praise. Rod Moore, great football player. We've got the backup. Johnson had a pick in the spring game. Sabb is on the rise. And then, you got Page and Moten. Let's go. I mean, you got to feel pretty good. Listening to Jesse Minter on that podcast this week, there was a part that stood out that I wanted to show to you before I give you my thoughts on the Michigan State spring scrimmage that I know everybody's tuned in and can't wait to get to. And it was this piece. You've heard me say that Josiah Stewart, the transfer from Coastal Carolina, reminds me of Dwight Freeney, who played for the Indianapolis Colts. And then I'm listening to Minter, and he's talking about Stewart and 12 sacks at Coastal Carolina. Then they moved him. He's friends with the defensive coordinator at Coastal, had some injuries, didn't have the production quite as the second year. But this is the part that had me thinking. Minter said in baseball term, he's our changeup in the sense that he's 6 foot, maybe 6'1". Not as big and long as our other guys, but he has a different skill set as a rusher. When a tackle has to block Braden McGregor on one play, Derek Moore on the next play, Jalen Harrell the next play, and then you throw Josiah at him, there's some good versatility there amongst the edges. Now, yes, there is amongst the four guys. And I love the baseball term. Because you think about a pitcher in his arsenal and what he's, bringing to the table. If you just throw a straight fastball, you can throw it 105 miles an hour. Big league ball players, they're going to be able to catch up to that. But if you can throw a changeup, you can mix in a curve and a slider, then you got, 4+ pitches. Well, next thing you know, you're talking about being, Sandy Koufax. You're great. And I was just thinking about it as an offensive lineman and the different edges. Harrell, who's been outstanding against the run, who I think is the most underrated player on that Michigan defense. I think he's a star. And, if you don't already think he's a star, that's okay. I do, and I think he will be the star of the Michigan defense. And I know Will Johnson, it's a tough one. There's a lot of stars. It's a good problem to have. But I think Harrell could be the best out of any of them. So you're bringing him. And then you got Derek Moore, who comps just as an NFL rush edge. I mean, he's the prototype. And when you saw him in the spring game, use that punch that he's got, he's going to be a tough guy to deal with. Well, then you are going with Braden McGregor. And what I saw from him, I don't want to say he was unorthodox, but it wasn't a straight rush edge where he's putting a punch out. What I saw from him is he was able to track the ball when it was Stroud was trying to throw a little pass over it. He knocked it down. When Stroud was trying a little something off, he batted it down. He's good with being able to track the ball. That's tough to do. Great athleticism there. Great, I don't know what you call that, hand-eye coordination to be able to get the football. Great reflexes. Boom. He's got that. So you're dealing with that. And then you're bringing in Stewart, who you've got all the things that you're doing against Moore and Harrell and everything else. And then you bring a guy that can flat out just flatline, pinpoint as a rush edge that quarterback and then get after him. That's it. That's what I have to say about the Michigan defense. I was going to try to keep it brief, and maybe I can make a short out of it. If I do it, can I do it in 5 minutes? Yeah, I could probably do it in 2 minutes, but pretty good defense here for Michigan and what they have going on. Let's see. We'll take some more of the feedback before we get to the Spartan spring game, which I watched today. And it was pretty exciting putting on that film at 7 o'clock in the morning. Mark says, beating OSU once hard. Last two don't matter much, except now Michigan's competitive and playing its best versus Ohio State. The next big plus. Andre says ESPN has to try to validate those bogus recruiting numbers. Yeah, that's not factual, Andres. I mean, take a shot at ESPN and doing anything else, but and maybe they put too much of the variable when they're using the FPI in recruiting, and that looks obvious because Michigan has Ohio State covered everywhere except recruiting, except they use rivals. They use their own, and then they use two of the other, the services that are out there, the fledgling one and whatever, Scout 24. They use a bunch of them to put them all together. So take a shot at ESPN, but saying that it's because they're validating themselves, that actually isn't true, but that's okay. Who cares, right? What I've learned here is when it comes to Michigan, you got your facts and you've got your, but who cares? If you're not pumping up Michigan and you're not on Michigan, to hell with you. That's what I've come what I've seen that people like. Who cares? You like Michigan State? To hell with you. Ohio State, you're biased. SEC, you're in bed with ESPN. Michigan's where it's at. I'm coming around to that reality and how it's happening. And people are following. I don't know if it's my lead or if I'm following your lead. We're there together. Talking about this Michigan defense. People feel pretty good about the Wolverines. Account 22 is excited about Josiah Stewart. Andres likes McGregor and more on the strong side. He's getting fired up just thinking about it. He's calling it, Andres is, a violent defensive line. That's a good thing. Account 22 says this defense will maul the Ohio O-line. Mark asking if there's any All-Americans on the defense. First team All-Big Ten. I'll say Will Johnson is an All-American. I'll say All-Big Ten. I will say Rod Moore. Can Rod Moore be an All-American? Sure. I mean, am I going to pick 5 All-Americans for Michigan's defense? I better slow it down a little bit. But I'll say Will Johnson, All-American. Rod Moore as All-Big Ten. Now I got to go to the linebackers. I think that Junior Colson can be All-Big Ten. When I go to the edge guys, you got Stewart. Oh, my God. I'm going to go Jalen Harrell as All-Big Ten. I am going to go with Chris Jenkins as All-Big Ten. Can I put Mason Graham in there too? Graham, Jenkins, Junior Colson, Jalen Harrell, Rod Moore, Will Johnson. It's half the defense. All Big Ten. Pretty good. Michigan's going to be pretty good. That MSU scrimmage was unwatchable. That gets us to where we're at. I turned it on and look, when you don't have a game and it's, the guys are wearing, covers on their helmets and, it got to be you feel even bad for the broadcasters who were sitting over there for the first hour of it. They had no action to talk about. The guys are, and it looks like a pretty good stretch there by number 32. He's really, let's go down to so-and-so Harris, who is with Tom Izzo. I mean, that's what they were doing. Let's go down and Tom Izzo talking about the basketball team. That was happening for Michigan State during the scrimmage. But I did take some notes and I did watch it. So let me give you some thoughts on what I saw from the Spartans watching their scrimmage. Mel Tucker was out there heading into his 4th year. The 5-7 record from last year, it puts Michigan State in a tough spot because they didn't have any bowl practices. So their younger guys, as much as they had, they got a good accounting of guys. They had a good recruiting class for Michigan State last year. They didn't get to work some of the other younger guys, but so that puts them behind the 8 ball a little bit with not having the bowl practices. I think that, and if you know any Michigan State fans, this is the number one thing about Spartan football this year. They brought back their defensive coordinator. There's not one Michigan State fan that I talk with that thought that that was a good idea. So me saying that, it was a good, wasn't the greatest idea. You say, oh, well, he's just a Michigan guy. True. But nobody that I talked with thought that bringing Hazelton back, the dude with the, ZZ Top starter kit, salt and pepper beard, was a good idea. And so that has people looking at the defense like, woo. So that's not a good idea. Didn't seem like a very good idea. And that stood out because they went to him and they were like, well, he must be hot down there with that beard. I'm like, you think it's going to be hot when it was 85 degrees? Just wait till they give up 40 points against Indiana. What I thought stood out as I was watching the coverage this morning, the replay, is that the Big Ten Network guys talking to Mel Tucker, they said this at least 5 times. Mel Tucker says this is his best transfer portal class in his 4 years in East Lansing. Now, Mel Tucker had Kenneth Walker as a transfer. And Tucker is calling this his best transfer portal class. So that's some high praise for the guys that he has coming in. We'll see. This is something to mark down and remember. That a pretty good recruiting class. And 6 or 7 of those guys were in for spring. But Tucker, I don't have the number in front of me. I looked at the list, maybe 9, 10 guys out of the transfer portal. And Tucker says they're the best since he's been in East Lansing. That's some high praise for the guys that he is bringing in. I looked at the depth chart for the running backs. Jalen Berger, the transfer from Wisconsin. I would think that he would be the number 1 guy. Does he have you shaking in your boots as a Michigan fan or anybody else? No. I don't know about this transfer. He's a big one. 6'2", 230 from Central Florida, Jaron Mangham. And then you get a walk on. There was a 3-star. And then Simmons, who he must have been hurt last year. He didn't do much for MSU. And none of them really did anything against Michigan last year. But, there's their running backs. But you say, well, what about the QBs? The QBs, they've got 3. And when you have the saying in football is when you have 2, you don't have 1. When you have 3, what does that mean? Well, you get a quarterback competition. I took it from Matt Charbonneau from the Detroit News, who tweeted out about State's QBs on Saturday. He says anyone who watched MSU today and thinks that Caton Hauser was better than Peyton Thorne and Noah Kim isn't a serious person. Charbonneau was asked about his opinion on where they are. And the guy that was asking the question said he thought that Kim held his own today. And Charbonneau agreed that Kim looked good, especially in his 2-minute session. But he would still say the pecking order is Thorne, Kim, and Hauser. Now, that's what I thought watching it as well. But here's somebody that covers the reporter for the team, and that's what he had to say about him. Here's that Spartan schedule. We'll do a little blaha. Let's take a look at that upcoming Spartan schedule. Coming up at 9-2. Oh, wait. Coming up on 9-2, CMU. CMU has pulled that upset a few times. It's been some of my finer Saturdays watching Central Michigan. They do it in back-to-back years, and then they did it a long time ago, which was very exciting. And then they went back-to-back, I think. Central, just a little bit north of East Lansing. That would make their season. Love to see that. The Richmond Spiders, and then Washington. And this makes me think back to last year. And it actually makes me think back to the pandemic because I saved up the 3 years before. I was going to take my vacation. And instead of going as a reporter or anything else, I was going to go out on a boat. I was going to tailgate out on a pontoon, and I was going to watch Michigan go to Washington. The pandemic wiped that out. So then you got Michigan State playing Washington, and then they went out there, and I had my friends like, hey, we're going on a pontoon. We're playing. So they had a great time until the game went off, and then they had a terrible time. Michael Penix tore them apart. Up until that point, I think there were a lot of people that thought that, hey, Mel Tucker, Tuck's coming, Tuck's, all of that. We're feeling pretty good. Let's get a cigar until they got whooped out there in Seattle. And then it was like, whoa, what happened? Well, what happened is Tuck was coming to the realization that he didn't have a very good defense. And then it continued on. So do I think that this is a pretty interesting one? But Michael Penix, I think Washington is a serious title contender. So State at least has a chance to show what they're all about. And that's a tough game, even though it's at home. Michigan on October the 21st. And that one's circled and underlined. Let's go through the losses. 1-0, 2-0, 2-1, 3-1, 3-2, 3-3, 3-4. This is at Michigan. We'll lose to Michigan and make it 3-4. The next week at Minnesota, 3-5. The next week against Nebraska, 4-5. At Ohio State, they'll lose that one. 4-6. At Indiana, loss. 4-7 versus Penn State, loss. 4-8. Now I could change my opinion, but right now I have State worse off than they were last year. Last year was pretty bad. As a 5-7 team, I have them just taking a little bit of a step back, 4-8. That's me. That's where I'm at with Michigan State. Agree? Disagree? Count 22 is going back to the Michigan defense. He wants to put Josiah Stewart as all Big Ten. I forgot about Mike Sanders still. Easy all Big Ten. There's another one. I forgot. Tom Izzo was pretty good. He had nearly 5,000 out there for a charity walk before the game. He was pretty excited. He was hot. That's it. Nobody really has much of anything good to say about MSU, but that's not a surprise. And if there were any MSU fans that were watching this, what do they think anybody's going to say about him? Tucker was also looking out for his assistants, and then he took all of their bonus money. Yeah. Well, hey, he did do that. Berger, who's that? Oh, that's their running back. Didn't come to Michigan because he was scared of the competition. I think that's factual. I mean, he wouldn't be playing at Michigan, so whether or not that's what he thought, that's actually was the reality. So, yeah, I'm sure he did look at the depth chart and like, I'm not going to Michigan. Which MSU quarterback is better than the Michigan backup? Ooh, that's a pretty good question. Would I take Davis Warren over Peyton Thorne? I mean, you put me in a tough spot, Mark. I'd probably take Peyton Thorne over a Michigan backup. Let's see. We can get some more Michigan State feedback. Washington with Penix are likely to explode. OT. How can Central ever make an EMU alum happy unless they're losing? How dare you? Well, you OT as I am. I do have a degree from Eastern Michigan, but I will be. I'll be rooting for the Chips. I know that sounds crazy, and if there is, I'll give my. You go through in your life, and growing up, I didn't have anything against Central Michigan. And, my mom had a cottage up just around Central. If you get on the wrong exit, sometimes you go through Mount Pleasant and, Sinclair, Michigan. I say all that because every time we were driving, and you see all the Mount Pleasant exits, everybody always says, one thing about Mount Pleasant, it's neither mountainous nor pleasant. And nobody ever got tired of that joke. But when I went to Eastern, so I didn't really have anything against Central, except, hey, they're directional, and, they have Western's Michigan, Eastern's rival, and so Central. But then I was doing a football game, play-by-play football game, and we were out in the stands. Nice job putting the student radio out in the stands. They didn't have any room for us in the press box, but that's a story for another time. But we're out there. And I go up to the Central crew, and I say, welcome into Ypsilanti. And the guy that shakes my hand, I might have been shaking a hand with a cold dead fish. He gave me one of those. And it wasn't very good. But then I went back to the guys, and we had something set up for a recording during the halftime, but the guy couldn't get it to go back in the booth. So the guy says, do you think you can get somebody to interview during the half? And I said, well, let me walk over to the guys. And I wasn't going to go into the press box and go all the way in there. So I said, look, you got these guys from Central. Maybe one of these guys will come on with us during the break or during the halftime. So I went over there and I said, hey, are you guys live during half? Do you have any halftime? And the guy said, no, it's all recorded. I said, hey, would one of you mind coming on for 5 minutes to do a segment with us? And immediately the guy's like, no. We're taking a break and we're, whatever it was. He just said no. Now look, little insider to the and I didn't know this. I was just starting out, but it's true. When you're a broadcaster out there and another broadcast team comes up and asks you, that's a real compliment, and as a young broadcaster, a really nice experience to go on to see, and the whole thing. You do it. Every time. I'm like, unless you're busy the whole time, you can understand. But the guys are like, no, we don't do anything. We're all set. Would you come on? No. So I'm saying this, OT, is that it made me think, I don't like these guys. And so then while we're doing the game, Eastern starts mounting a comeback. And then we're pretty close to the Central Michigan broadcast. And then Eastern ends up, in the end, blowing them out. Charlie Batch, I think, was the quarterback for Eastern. And I'd have to find the tape, but it got into the fourth quarter, and you could say that I was trolling the Central Michigan radio team that was pretty close, and they were right next to us. Because their most famous alum, somebody that I loved as a broadcaster named Dick Enberg. But Dick Enberg's famous saying was, oh my. And it got to be where there were 4 or 5 minutes left of the game, and so I started giving it like, oh my. Yelling over to the Central crew. And these guys, I think they wanted to fight me, which I wouldn't have minded. I would have taken them on anyways. I don't advocate all that. That's one of my favorite memories about Central Michigan there, OT. I'm in. Mark likes state a little bit more than I do. Ooh, the Charlie Batch even beat the Cleveland Browns. Okay. I think that's all I have on MSU. Account 22 is thinking 5-7, so a repeat of last year. I'm thinking about 4-8. But 5-7. Crazier things have happened for MSU. I do predict it won't be long. I'll look on here. I think by October they'll be saying, "Let's just get into basketball." Chippewas and Eagles, feathers everywhere. There you go. They had just moved to be Eagles. It wasn't. It might have been the first year they were Eagles. It was Hurons right before those. It was right there during the changeover for the green and white. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today. We'll see you over on the Den, so the posting board for the Maize and Blue review. And until tomorrow, everybody have a great day. Take care.